Many of the authors I help as a writing coach seem to get a little bit ahead of themselves as they try to figure out this whole becoming an author thing. Many of them agonize over whether they should self-publish or publish conventionally. I used to think that they were getting way ahead of themselves and that they could not worry about that from the get-go, but then I realized the wisdom in knowing how you want to publish at the beginning of the process, because I think it gives you a much better idea of all of the steps that are going to be involved in writing and publishing your book. So today in this week's episode of the How to Be an Author podcast, I am going to be giving you a bunch of the pros and cons to each of those publishing methods, from self-publishing to traditional or conventional publishing. There's one type of publishing that I'm kind of gonna leave out. So you might have heard of indie publishing, and I'm not leaving that out because that is self-publishing in the way I describe it. But then there is hybrid publishing, or a hybrid model. Now, there are two definitions to this. Some authors have a combination of self-publishing and traditional publishing. They'll have a publisher who's publishing one series of books or one type of book, and then they've got this great lively career self-publishing another genre or another style of book. And many times this is a method that really helps authors to maximize their earning potential and their exposure to readers. So we'll definitely be talking about this combo thing at the end of this podcast. But another definition of hybrid publishing is all of those companies that claim to be a publisher and that they say, yes, we want to publish your book and you just need to pay a small amount or a big amount, and we're going to do everything for you once you've paid us this. And I really don't believe in that type of company. So some of you can come for me if you work for one of those companies or if you've gone with one of those companies before. I believe that these publishers, or these so-called publishers who say that they're hybrid publishers and that they, quote, help you, and then they take a portion of your royalties and some money, I don't think that that is something that you really should aspire to, because I think you should go ahead and decide, do I want to publish conventionally or do I want to publish myself? And then do one of those two things. Now, that's not to say that you're not going to hire some professionals to help you, whether you're publishing yourself or publishing in the traditional way. And again, we're going to be talking all about that. But I do not want you to get conned as you embark on this publishing journey. We're not born knowing how to publish. We're not born knowing which of the publishing methods is for us and how to even do both of those things. So in this week's episode, you're going to get a lot of value and a lot of discussion about how all of this works, because I think clarity is key. Now, one more thing before we launch into kind of what is self-publishing, what is traditional publishing, what should you go for, and why. We're going to talk about authors who think to themselves, well, I'm going to publish traditionally, or at least try to. And if it doesn't work because of the gatekeepers, etc., I'm just going to turn around and self-publish. Yes, in fact, that is something that I started off doing because I had a bad experience with an agent. I got kind of conned, and then I was like, that's it, I'm going to self-publish. And it was a bit of a reaction. Now, of course, I think it's fair enough to say I'm going to try to publish conventionally, and if it doesn't work out, I'm going to go on to publish myself. But you're going to have to realize that there's going to be a whole series of steps you're going to have to go through. It's not something you can just turn around and pull the trigger on right away. There are going to be other considerations. And I have a client who's actually in that process right now. She tried to publish conventionally. After a while of it not working out, she made the decision that she was going to publish herself, and she's actually doing it all right. So I'll tell you a little bit about what she's doing. I think it's brilliant. So get ready to take some notes, because this whole podcast is really going to answer all of those huge questions you have about publishing. If you're a writer dreaming of becoming a successful author, join me, writing coach Karenna Akavane, on the How to Be an Author podcast, your weekly source for writing information, inspiration, and motivation. So when I first started out in my whole writing career, I remember that self-publishing was considered to be something of a cop-out. It was considered to be something that was a vanity press that people were doing for their ego, that it wasn't real publishing, and that the only real publishing was publishing through one of those big publishing houses in New York, and that you needed a literary agent, and that you needed a publisher, and that you would get this huge advance, and you would live happily ever after. Well, let me tell you that I was wrong then, first of all, because even back then, writers were kicking butt on the other self-publishing angle. There were a few writers who made millions because they were early adopters of these concepts of publishing yourself. But self-publishing has come a really, really long way since those early days. And also, I think that these days, I would say that self-publishing is really the way to go for quite a number of authors. And we're going to talk about really, should you think about it as something that's an alternative to publishing conventionally, but more of a, oh, well, I have to because I wasn't picked up by an author? Or should you just even start off saying, I've just decided I'm going to self-publish. I'm not even going to go through the whole querying process because that's a process. So let's talk about that. So let's talk about first, is it even possible for you as an author in the genre you're working in? Is it possible for you to think that you may get a traditional publishing deal? The people who are getting traditional publishing deals are typically writers whose books have the opportunity to sell lots and lots of copies. They have kind of a built-in established audience. They're a book in an easily recognizable genre, often a thriller or something like that. They're books that are mainstream. They're books that the author's agent or publisher is going to look at it and say, you know what? I know I can sell this. And it's going to be relatively easy to take this book and run with it and get lots of readers. With a simple marketing campaign, we're going to do a lot. Fine. So, is your book one of those books? Be realistic about it. Are you a well-known person? Have you written successful self-published books before? Is your book in a mainstream genre that's got a great story? Have you made it as professional as possible? Now, this is really, really important. A lot of writers make this enormous mistake when they think about traditionally publishing. They think to themselves, well, this is a great way for me to save money. I don't have to pay for a cover designer. I don't have to pay for an editor. I don't have to pay for formatting or copy reading or proofreading. I basically can just deliver a big steaming pile of horse shit to a bunch of agents who are going to see the diamond in the rough that it is. And then I'm going to get this amazing editing team that's basically going to do it for me. And then I'm going to have a huge marketing campaign and my book's pretty much going to sell itself and I'm just going to rake in the money. Well, it doesn't happen that way. Most agents, when they want to see a book, they want to see a book that's already pretty polished. Because here's the sad truth. These days, most books don't get a huge advance. And most books don't make back their advance. There's a small percentage of books in any publishing company's roster that make the glut of the money. And then the other books are kind of a gamble. Really, they're a test or they're an experiment. There's something that the publishing company thinks will make them look good and may be published for a certain purpose, like maybe winning a prize or a contest or winning the attention of a certain subgroup of society or, of the cultural landscape, something like that. But they don't think that this is something that's going to make them that much money unless it does. So that's why they're gambling on it. But they are not going to put their whole marketing budget behind it. And they're not going to be paying for hours and hours of editing on your book. They want something that they can pretty much take and see the value of and that they can publish. reasonably quickly. So, but here's another thing, this whole reasonably quickly thing. A lot of authors think, I don't have time to spend on doing all of this stuff, like the editing and the, cover is just too much. I want to have a publisher that's going to have that whole team in place and they can do it really fast. Well, newsflash. If you want to publish more quickly, conventional publishing is not the way to go. There is a very, very long pipeline that your book enters into, and it's a whole thing that it needs to go through. So your book's not going to see the light of day for at least a year and a half, if not more. So think about that. So can you get a traditional publishing deal? Do you have an audience already of at least 25,000 people somewhere on? I talk about author platform a lot. So do you have a platform? Do you have 25,000 engaged followers on your Instagram or on your Pinterest or on your TikTok? Do you have these followers that are waiting for your specific book? Then yeah, maybe you can get a traditional publishing deal. But I would say that if you have that many followers and you have a big mailing list, why don't you self-publish? Because you will keep more of the royalties. Now, I've spoken to some authors before who come to me because they're like, wait, I just got offered a publishing deal and I'm not sure if it's a scam or if it's worth it. What should I do? Should I choose to go with this publishing deal or should I self-publish? And oftentimes these authors are pretty savvy because the fact that, okay, first of all, they've been offered a deal, great. That says a lot about their writing and about the fact that they went through the process, but also they're smart enough to think about it twice. They're smart enough not to just go, oh, wow, this is the best news ever. Okay, I trust everyone. I'm going to do it. They're looking after their own self-interest, and I think that's brilliant. So I usually run these authors through a certain number of questions. So I ask them about their values as a writer. So is status really important to them? Like, how much is it worth to them to be able to say, yes, my book is going to be published by Random House? Hey, if that's crucial to you, if that's something that makes you feel like you've finally arrived, like you are now finally a real author, that you weren't a real author until this was offered to you, and that if it's important to you to tell people, yes, I'm a published author at Random House, and this changes your view of your value and whether you're doing well or not, I would say by all means, take the traditional publishing deal. You may or may not make more money, but if the status is what's important to you, then yes, that's going to be worth the money that you might lose, that you might leave on the table by paying out royalties to your agent and your publisher. I would say for your ego, for your status, do it. You can always self-publish later and capitalize on any fame that you might get. So yeah, that status and validation, that's really integral to the whole traditional thing. In a way, I sometimes ask myself, knowing that you leave a lot of money on the table in general, except for some exceptions, when you have somebody else taking a huge portion of your gains and sales, I tell myself, why is it worth it? Yeah, the validation might make it worth it. Another thing is if you are writing a book that you know is going to sell pretty well, but that you haven't done the marketing yet, and you think if you've been offered this publishing deal and they're saying, we're going to give you an advance of X amount. Again, realize that that advance might be all the money you're going to see from that book. In fact, it probably is all the money you're going to see. But if you need a quick influx of money into your account, hey, I'm not going to tell you not to take it. I would say go traditional, because publishing your own book, the money you're going to make is a huge function of how much work you're putting into it in terms of marketing and getting it in front of people. And nothing is for certain. So if somebody's offering you $25,000 or even $5,000 on a silver platter right away up front, I say give it a thought for sure. But if your value is more about building your career over time and building that income over time, building your ability to earn and to sustain yourself as an author over time and control your own platform, then I would say that being conventionally published isn't really for you. Because think about this. You may sell a few more copies of your book upfront because the publishing company has their marketing campaign. But where are they finding those readers? They're finding those readers from amongst the people who are already in their kind of address book, basically. Address book is at large. They're going through their regular marketing channels and they're marketing your book to see if it'll stick. And that means that you don't have direct access on any of those readers. You don't have them in your mailing list, unless you're smart and you go back and make sure that they end up there somehow. But there could be a problem. The publishing company wants access to those people. They want access to their pocketbooks. So they're going to make it difficult for you to really have a communication with your reader directly and to benefit from having that reader on a mailing list. I'm telling you, a mailing list is one of the best things you can do. But if you have your own social media platform, your own mailing list, you're controlling how you speak to your reader, how you reach them, how you sell to them. So I think that's something that you really need to consider, is that if you are going with a publisher, they basically own your reader. They own that mailing list. You don't. Now, some writers think about, I just want the freedom of being able to write all the time and then I get published conventionally. I don't have to do any of that extra work. Well, actually, if you want freedom, I would say self-publish, because you get to choose how much you do on your book. You are imposing the deadlines on yourself. You're deciding what kind of cover you get, that artistic freedom, that creativity. All of that is something that you are probably going to lose if you publish conventionally. Your publishing house is going to tell you what your cover is going to look like. They're going to maybe make some changes to your storyline that you're not going to like. Or let's say a movie is made from your book. Well, you might be out of that whole conversation. So if you want to make an impact creatively, you might want to consider self-publishing. You have more ownership over that whole creative project. Self-publishing lets you decide how you present yourself to the world. And I think that that's really, really crucial. So a lot of times people say, well, traditional publishing, though, is going to have this huge wide distribution for me, and I'm going to be on library shelves, I'm going to be in bookstores, and all of that good stuff. I'm going to get marketed all the time. They're going to do ads for my book. Okay, here's a question for you. How big is a library? How big is your basic bookstore? Now, how many books get published each year? I don't think I need to tell you that not all books make it onto the shelves of those libraries and those bookstores. And not all books get that wonderful full-page ad in the New York Times. It just doesn't happen. Remember how I talked about how the publishing houses have a handful of books that they know as their big money makers, and that the other ones they take on are more of a little gamble or more of a niche thing that they're doing for a specific reason? Yeah. If your book is one of those, there's a huge chance that even though you traditionally published, maybe even with a really reputable publishing house, your book is not going to make it necessarily into that wide distribution, and it's not going to get that super exposure that you thought it would get. In fact, for many smaller authors or newer authors that publishing companies take on, there's an expectation that the author is going to do a lot of their own marketing. I know one author who was picked up by a relatively large press, I would say, and she thought, oh, this is it. I'm, from now on, it's just all champagne and book signings. And to her credit, it is all about champagne and book signings. But guess who's organizing those? She is. She has enlisted her own network, and she has really hustled to get herself out there. And I think she's doing a great job at it. She's got a fantastic social media game. And yes, she has to mention her publisher all the time, so they get a little bit of the credit, but that marketing, she's still doing it. So I wonder if she's going to decide later on in her career that, hey, you know what? I got the ego boost and the validation from that traditional publishing. I think I might forge out on my own now because I'm a little bit known. So I talked about also kind of that issue with the fact that the books, when they're in that traditional publishing pipeline, they take a long time to be published. Now, if you're an impatient person, you might be thinking to yourself, well, that alone is a great reason for me to self-publish because I don't have time for that. To which I say, whoa, 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 whoa. Your self-published book, in order to do well, in order to not embarrass you and give a bad name to self-publishing, it's going to need to be polished and professional. I really strongly believe that you need to put your book through several rounds of beta readers and then an editor, a copy editor, a cover designer, and formatting. This takes quite a while to get right. And let me beg you that you've put the work into writing a great story. Why wouldn't you take those extra months to make sure that you're doing it right when it comes to self-publishing so that you don't embarrass yourself and that you don't disappoint your reader? So I was talking at the beginning of this podcast about a client of mine who had started off thinking that she wanted to publish conventionally. She went through the querying process just with a few queries, not even that many. And this is something we're going to talk about. I think she probably could have gone through a little bit more. But actually, what I like about what she did is that she decided of herself that actually self-publishing was for her. She decided that, you know what, I was just doing this out of ego. I want to self-publish because I have more control over my book, where it goes. It's kind of a niche thing, and I know my niche, she thought to herself, and she's correct. She knows her niche really well, and she's building a really good platform. So I think that she's absolutely right to self-publish. And the other thing she did right is she thought to herself, well, you know what, now that it's got my name on it and that I am responsible for putting this out, I'm going to take a few more months to make sure it's perfect. And that is fantastic. So she, after having hired a writing coach to really work on her story and do a developmental edit of that initial story, she's now sent it through a second round of beta readers, and she's now going to hire an editor to make sure that this book is everything it can be. So another thing that happens with traditional publishing that I think, let's talk money, because traditional publishing is all about selling a product. Yes. And when you're self-publishing, it's also all about selling a product. But here's the advantage that you have if you're self-publishing is that you can sell that book for a lot less because you didn't have as many production costs. So yes, you probably hired an editor. Yes, you hired a cover designer, but those come with a whole range of costs. I can say this for certain. You have spent less than the publishing company spent producing your book. They also are going to print advanced copies if they're doing paper copies of your book, whereas you can do print on demand. So you don't have that coming out of your pocket. That's a huge advantage. So this means that the publishing company needs to put a really high price on your book compared to self-published books. And I think that the savvy reader who's just looking for a good story and who doesn't have their value system tied up in whether the book was published conventionally or traditionally, and P.S., by the way, it's harder and harder to tell these days, especially online, what's been published conventionally versus not. So you have a better chance of selling your book if it's a lower price, and you're going to get more of that royalty when you sell your book. It's going to come straight to you. The other thing is that many authors, when they write their book, they fantasize about their cover. And I get it. This is one of the most exciting things when you're writing your book is, first of all, holding that copy in your hand is amazing. But seeing that cover that you imagined that whole time, the cover is so crucial. It is the first thing that people see when they're coming across your book on the shelves of a bookstore or online. That cover is going to be crucial. So many authors have a really strong opinion on how they want that cover to look. And what happens when you get conventionally published is that the publishing house, their marketing department, is going to decide, they have an art department as well, they're going to decide how that cover art's going to look. And they might decide on what your title is going to be. And so that means that you've lost that artistic freedom. And if you really cared about that a lot, then you're going to be disappointed. That's going to suck. If if they make a decision regarding your book and you're like, I don't like that, well, there's a chance that they might say, listen, we're either doing it this way or you're out of your contract and you have to pay, that advance back. And that's really difficult too. By the way, if all of this is sounding super confusing and you're getting more and more scared, let me just tell you that you don't need to be scared. In this episode of the podcast, I'm running you through a lot of the things that you want to think about. And if it's starting to overwhelm you, please know that in my course From Idea to Published in 6 months, you will have every single checklist, every little board that has the pros and cons. You'll have the step-by-step instruction manual on how to do each of these methods of publishing right, how to make the decision, and then how to make your book the best candidate for either one of these options. So if you're getting terrified, I really recommend going over to my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com, and sign up for updates and newsletters, because you will be able to have access to this course that is going to give you absolutely everything you need, with worksheets and everything, checklists. There's nothing that you won't have. You will literally have every single tool in that course. So you can go also to coursesforwriters.com, and you will see that course from idea to published in that web page. And if you just say, tell me more, you'll get to sign up and you'll be the first to know, and you will get a discount with that course, which, by the way, also comes with office hours with me. It comes with a membership to my site, which means that you get extra podcast episodes, you get extra mini courses, and you get the writing group, and you get office hours, which means that if you ever have a question or a problem, or you just want me to tell you, hey, you're doing fine, or hey, let's tweak this, you're going to get all of that for a very low price. So I'm very excited for you, and I hope that you sign up so that you get access to that as soon as it comes out. Okay, so let's go back to talking about this traditional publishing versus self-publishing. So we were talking about the money, how much you get paid. And yeah, you get paid these royalties. And this is just a small fraction of what your book is making, because other people are getting paid on this, right? Your agent, your publisher, they're all paying themselves first. And you're going to be getting paid your royalties twice a year. Whereas if you're self-publishing, you're getting paid once a month. So maybe if you want to have more even income that you can control a little bit, and you want to control, as I said, the price and the cover, that's awesome. Go with self-publishing. You're getting that high royalty rate because really you're getting a high percentage after Amazon basically takes their cut, or Apple eBooks. You're basically getting all of the money that comes to you. So that's pretty great. And of course, every decision is yours along the way. And now I've talked about the professional editing, the formatting, the cover art. Sure, that you're thinking is a definite pro of being conventionally published, except again, the reason that so few writers get picked up by agents and publishers is that those things carry a cost. So if the agent or publisher doesn't believe that they can sell enough copies of your book to offset that expense plus some, they're not going to take you on. So that dream of having that free editing and that free everything and that free money, it's not happening. But what's funny is when I speak to several of my writing clients about self-publishing, the first thing they say is, I don't have that kind of money. I can't afford an ISBN number. I can't afford cover art. I can't afford formatting. And here's what I have to say about that. This is wild. Too many of you listen to other people on some questionable platforms who say, oh my God, ISBNs cost a fortune. I had a client just the other day who said, oh, I can't afford an ISBN, so I'm not going to get one for this book. And I said to her, you can't afford not to get an ISBN because that's what you need to distribute your book, or at least paper copies of it to have it in bookstores. And an ISBN doesn't cost as much as you think. You can sell a few copies of your book and you've covered it. So don't shoot yourself in the foot by cheaping out because you're afraid of the expenses. There are easy ways to make the money to pay for these things. You can also go in on a group of 10 ISBNs with other writers and share it. And you're spending basically $29 for an ISBN. I'm sorry, you can go dog sit, babysit, work an extra hour at work, and you have covered that no matter what kind of job you're working. That's money that you can find. And that's also something that you can't afford not to do. So really, as an author, it's your job to do all the things that you need to do to make sure that if you're self-publishing, you have the most odds of selling lots of books. Same thing goes for editing. I have a client who hired me to help with all the story development, all of that. And at the end, she'd spent pretty big amount of money. And this book is going to be a huge part of her platform. It's going to be supporting a lot of things. It's a nonfiction book. It's going to be supporting a lot of things, including a coaching career and retreats. So this book is a really important tool for this person. So they understood that. And that's why they started investing in it. But by the time they were done with all this story development, that took longer than they thought because it's a complicated project. They were like, I don't have that much money left over for editing. And guess what they did? They actually traded somebody for editing. So think about things that you're able to do. What are you able to do that an editor, a professional editor, might want as an exchange? I have a friend who's a dentist, and she actually does dental work on exchange for things like editing. You'd be amazed. I have friends who can do dog grooming. I've got a friend who's a decorative painter, and all of these things are done on exchange for editing, believe it or not. So these are things that you can definitely barter, and I think that's really worth it. So think about that. And at the very least, like let's say you're destitute and you just want to have a book out as a test and it's not going to be perfect. Well, at the very least, make sure that you have a ton of beta readers. Those are free, and you definitely want to do a good job. Now, cover art is another one of those things where, it runs the gamut when it comes to cost. But the most important thing is you really need a professional looking cover. And the sad part is sometimes you don't pay more for a better cover. You sometimes end up paying and it's still pretty bad. I think that it's important to invest the time and effort into seeing what it is that you want and really vetting the person you're going to hire to make sure that it's worth it when you pay whatever you're paying, that it's totally worth it. That's super important because you don't want to enter into that thing where people say, well, look at this book with a crappy cover and no editing. This is what self-publishing is. Well, that shouldn't be what self-publishing is. But unfortunately, yes, there's a glut of terrible books where the authors did not wait before they hit publish. They just uploaded something horrible. And I think that is a lot of a bummer for me. I think that's sad. So you need to be realistic. Okay, if you write something bad and you publish it, you self-publish it, and you don't market it, it's not going to sell. And in fact, it could actually hurt your author platform because you're going to get a bad reputation. But same thing goes if you're trying to publish conventionally. No one's going to support your dreams just because you're a nice person. They're only going to do that if they think they can sell your book. So the most crucial step is to have a book that you believe in and that that someone else is gonna believe in. Now let's talk about the process. So I've mentioned that quite a few authors are like, okay, well, I'm gonna try to get a conventional publishing deal, and if it doesn't work, I'm gonna self-publish. Fair enough. However, if you can plan for it, it's really good to know what's on your list and to know what you need to do step by step to do that self-publishing versus conventional publishing. I would say that no matter what you're doing, you're going to want to start building that author platform because guess what? If you have an author platform, it actually makes it easier for you to conventionally publish as well because those agents and publishers are seeing that you have influence, you have reach, you have a presence in the online world with people who are looking at you as an author. I think that that's something crucial to think about. And then think about how you're going to be reaching your readers, et cetera, et cetera. And, I would say that you want to build that mailing list long before you start publishing your book or trying to. Here are the steps that you're going to go through. So if you're going to be publishing conventionally or hoping to, you're going to write the best book possible. You might get it professionally edited. I think that that's totally worth it. You don't need to think about a cover at all, but you definitely do need to write a good synopsis, write a blurb, start building that audience. All of those things you're doing just like you would do if you're going to be self-publishing. The difference is when you're going to be conventionally publishing, you're going to create a query package. And that query package is some stuff that the agent has asked for. So you're going to research agents and you need to look for the right agents for your book. Too many authors find a short list of agents that aren't even the right agents. They send their stuff out and they actually do like a send all. So basically it's super not personalized. The agent gets kind of annoyed because you're sending something they didn't ask for. And then they get discouraged because they get like 3 rejections and they go, I guess publishing's not for me. No. You need to know that both with self-publishing and conventional publishing, consistency and trying over and over again is what's going to get you the results. You can't just try once for 1 second. Most successful authors who are conventionally published will tell you that they got a ton of rejections, a ton, before they finally had that thing that worked. And same thing when you're self-publishing, you might have a ton of crappy books until finally you figure it all out and then you get some good sales. Now, when you're thinking about querying agents, as I said, give yourself enough time. Don't be impatient. Get a list of agents that look appropriate, that are accepting submissions, that want books like yours, and then work really hard on that query package. Work really hard on your cover letter. Make sure that your first couple chapters look impeccable. Make sure that your synopsis is super compelling. And then you're going to send that to the agents and you're going to wait. And then you're going to start that process over and over again. And in the meantime, you're going to be working hard on making yourself look like the type of author whose books can sell and the type of author who's going to be pleasant to work with. That's really, really important. Now, if you've decided that you want to self-publish, let's talk about some of the mistakes that authors tend to make. I talked about that skimping on editing and on copy formatting and all of that stuff, and on the cover, and on not getting an ISBN. These things all contribute to sales. The cover's the first impression people get, for example. And if somebody's reading your book and they come across 3 spelling mistakes in the first 10 pages, your book's not going to look very good. That's going to impact your sales. So make sure that you're not skimping time-wise or money-wise on your book. Now, another thing is, I talked about the synopsis, like when you're sending that blurb to agents, when you're querying, you need one of those as well if you're self-publishing your book. Your book description is another one of the first impressions that your book's going to have. When people are looking it up on Amazon or on Apple Books or whichever place they look for books, that stuff that's your cover jacket, back blurb, etc., that's crucial. And you're going to optimize it not only to get your reader to get excited about it, but also for searchability. So you're going to need to learn some things on how to optimize your description on Amazon, how to be found by search engine optimization, all of that. And that's going to take some research. And you know what? No matter who you are, no matter what you're doing, even if you're publishing conventionally, I think that doing a little bit of market analysis and a little bit of research to understand where your book fits in this whole genre, in the whole market for books, what it's most like, and what the best way of selling that book to your demographic is, that research is going to be time well spent. Definitely. Another thing that your research is going to help you to do is to see what the timing is. So when are you publishing your book? Depending on your genre, depending on your subject, depending on what it is, there are different times of year, different times of the week, just different times in general where it's better to be publishing your book and promoting your book. So think about that. Now, another thing that writers do, I was talking about your pre-sales strategies, like your pre-launch strategy when you're building your list, when you're advertising your book, when you're getting people excited about it. Look at conventional publishing houses. They do this pretty well, especially if they have an advertising campaign for a book. They're going to start teasing it out. They're going to tell people you can order your advanced copies. They're going to send advanced copies to reviewers, to certain people who are going to be kind of hyping this book up. Articles are going to come out about the book before it's even published, so that when that publication date comes, there might be a big bump in sales at first that might launch that book onto a bestseller list. I think that's really crucial. So if you're announcing a release date, that's getting people excited, but make sure you stick to it, because if you don't stick to it, you're disappointing your readers, and that's the last thing you want to do. And speaking about marketing, marketing is the difference between a book that sells and doesn't sell. So whether you are self-publishing or conventionally publishing, that marketing is something that I want you to be thinking about and doing all the time. Traditional publishers are absolutely asking authors to help out with marketing and social media. And why wouldn't you? Imagine if you're conventionally published and your publisher has access to a certain demographic that they're used to marketing to, but you know that your book has a different niche as well that you could easily market to because you've got a footprint in that niche. Let's say that it's like the figure skating competition world, or horseback riding people, or people who like to knit and love cozy mysteries. And you actually have a lot of people like that in your social media platform or in your mailing list, why wouldn't you help your publishing company to get a bump in sales? Now, again, as I'm saying, if you have this huge following, it might be worth it for you to just self-publish because you've got that marketing strategy already and you know that that's going to help. I've seen authors do a funny thing as well where they're like, oh, it's really hard to tell the difference between self-published books and conventionally published books. I even said this earlier in this episode. And therefore, what they do is they say, well, these conventionally published books are selling for X amount, much higher than most self-published books. Why wouldn't I try to get all the money? And I'm telling you that that's kind of a mistake. You don't want to price your book too low because that tells people that maybe I'm not getting a good book. Like if it's 25 cents as opposed to everybody else's is $2.99, people are going to think, well, it's cheap. It's not going to be good. But you don't want to price it super high. So when I first started writing coaching, I had this client who came to me and he was livid because he had sold no copies of his book. And I was like, okay, let's look up what's going on. Usually when I get a new client for coaching, I do a lot of research on their social media. I look at their book promotion platforms. I look at their website. I look at any reviews that they're getting. I look at a lot of those things. And with this guy, I saw the problem right away. He was charging $25 for his ebook, a fiction ebook, not even an online course, not even something technical, not a textbook that we know are super expensive, but a regular fiction book by an unknown author. And I said to him, why are you charging $25? And he said, because my story is that good. And I said, great. Well, how many of your readers have given you reviews saying that? Because it's really hard to get reviews, by the way, but how many people have told you that your book's that good and that it's worth $25? He's like, oh, none. Nobody will read it. I'm like, okay, well, this is a little problem. And unfortunately, this is one of those clients where I was not able to get it through his thick skull. And I bet that he still hasn't sold a single copy of that $25 book. So price is really, really important. Look at print pricing, look at book pricing trends, et cetera, et cetera. I think that that's really an important way to look at it. Now, of course, there's the really bad news that despite all your efforts, even if your book's conventionally published or if it's self-published, your book tanks. It totally fails. It sells really badly. It's, for some reason, it just didn't hit right. And you think to yourself, this is the end of the world. And I'm here to tell you, no. So first of all, if you had a book that was conventionally published and it tanks, I think it's up to you to ask the publisher, okay, now, do you still have the rights to this? Do you want to relinquish your rights? What do we do about this? See, this is kind of why maybe self-publishing makes more sense because your book tanks with a certain publisher. Maybe it is in part due to a poor marketing campaign on their part or a poor choice of cover. Maybe it's due to some things that they did. But the problem is that you don't really have the freedom to fix those things because they pretty much own the rights to your book. Whereas if you wrote a book that totally tanked, you can then take that book down, you can rework it, you can put a pen name on it, and you can change the cover, change the description, do a lot of things to see if there's some tweaks that you can make so that that book isn't a complete loss. So I have a bunch of books that are under pen names that, didn't do that great. I didn't really want them under my name, but they're still a valid book that some people are buying. So it's something that I thought to myself, this is great. And this is kind of what I'm talking about too, as the hybrid publisher, that you have some books that are published by a regular publisher, conventional publisher, some books you're publishing yourself, and maybe even more books that you're publishing yourself, but under a different name. I think that's a really, really cool way of diversifying. When you diversify, you reach more readers. And you can do so much. So that's the really crucial thing, that you need to understand that publishing is not the end of the road. So you need to plan for things like what comes next once I've published. How do I keep promoting myself? How do I keep making sure that my book is going to do as well as possible? You can keep launching and relaunching a book or remarketing the same book over and over again so that your book can keep being a success. It can keep getting these boosts in sales. And if your book fails miserably, that's not the end of the road either. You can do some other things, and then there's always the next book. And all these lessons that you learn from publishing, whichever way you've done it, whether it's conventional or self-published, you're going to learn some important lessons. So really, I highly recommend that you kind of take notes along the way, keep all those analytics as to what happened and any lessons that you learned. Just keep those not just in your mind, but in your notes so that you can implement some changes and improvements when you do this whole thing the next time. Because if you want to be a successful author, you don't just publish a single book and rest on your laurels the rest of your life. You're going to be writing more and publishing more. And I'm kind of excited to see where the whole publishing industry is going to go, because I think we'll still have some changes. We're going to have even more ways of getting our stories in front of readers or audiences in the future. Content is king. There's still voracious readers out there, and it's up to us to find them and to give them what they want. Thank you so much for joining me today. Again, if you want to have a step-by-step instructions on how to write and publish your book in 6 months or maybe a little bit more, but definitely have that whole blueprint, step-by-step instructions, you're definitely going to want to get on that advanced list for the course From Idea to Published, and get on that website, creativeandwritingcoach.com or onlineCoursesForWriters.com. Check it out. You're going to get a lot of value, including those office hours, which I'm really excited to start launching in the fall. If you have any pressing writing-related questions or would like to be featured on the How to Be an Author podcast, please feel free to reach out on my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com.